Good morning and welcome to our weekly look at the preaching text for Sunday morning. I must confess I strayed from the lectionary this week. The reading was supposed to be from Galatians. We've been in those letters of Paul post-Easter as we lead up to Pentecost. But because it's Baccalaureate Sunday and I felt called to preach on this text, and it's from the Gospel of John, the 8th chapter. It's a text I don't think I've ever preached on in my years of ministry, and it's verses 2 through 11 in chapter 8. It's the story of the woman caught in adultery, which is the way the story is typically referred to, and that tends to be the focus, I think, of this story, the woman caught in adultery. We tend to focus on that. The other part that's interesting about it is that it's just the woman who's brought before Jesus by the religious leaders, the elders. The man is left out of the picture, which is troublesome to me and reflective, I think, of the times. But I think it's worth noting. Let me just read it for you. It's short. It's worth hearing. And I think it's a very powerful story in John's Gospel. There's many of these kinds of stories in John's Gospel that have to do with an interaction between Jesus and an individual or a group of people, and his ability to help us to see things in a new and a different way. And that's partly what happens, I think, in this text. Early in the morning, he came again to the temple. All the people came to him, and he sat down and began to teach them. The scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in adultery, and making her stand before all of them, they said to him, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the very act of committing adultery. Now in the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. Now what do you say?" They said this to test him so that they might have some charge to bring against him. Jesus bent down and wrote with his finger on the ground. When they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and said to them, "Let anyone among you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." And once again he bent down and wrote on the ground. When they heard it, they went away, one by one, beginning with the elders, and Jesus was left alone with the woman standing before him. Jesus straightened up and said to her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" She said, "No one, sir." And Jesus said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go your way, and from now on, do not sin again." He's often in the temple when he gets to Jerusalem prior to his death and resurrection. And anytime he's at the temple, he's teaching. There's a crowd of people. And the scribes and the Pharisees are always trying to test him, to catch him, to find some way to make Jesus guilty, to turn the crowds against him. And this is another example of that. They bring a woman who had been caught in adultery. And part of this makes me very sad, and making her stand before all of them. Think of the shame, the public shame this woman must have felt, the vulnerability, irregardless of what she's been accused of. And they go back to the law of Moses and say, the law commands us to stone such women. The punishment was very harsh. And it was religiously the right thing to do. Stop and think about that for a moment. And they posed the question, "Now what do you say?" They posed the question to Jesus. And the text tells us directly they said this to test him so they might have some charge to bring against him, because if Jesus went against the law of Moses, if he said something contrary, then the religious leaders could trap him and find a way to accuse him and punish him. But Jesus has an interesting way of getting us to think about things in a new way. And that's what happens here. He doesn't say anything. He just simply bends down and begins to write with his finger on the ground. Doesn't say what he was writing. Was he just doodling? Was he writing something? But he seems to be deliberately ignoring them. And they keep on questioning him, and he finally he straightens up and he says to them, "Let anyone among you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." And then he kneels back down and begins to write in the sand, to doodle in the sand or whatever. And that's all he says. And the power of getting the crowd to stop and think about what it is they were contemplating doing to this woman who was so vulnerable. And religiously, they were within the bounds to do that. But Jesus doesn't see her as an adulteress, but he sees her humanity, and he loves her, and he cares for her. And the crowd, when they hear his words, they get quiet. They went away one by one, beginning with the elders, and pretty soon Jesus is left standing alone with the woman. And he gets her to answer the question. He gets her to observe what's happening. Is there no one? Where are they? Has no one condemned you? And she said, "No one, sir." And he says, "Neither do I condemn you. Go your way, and from now on, do not sin again." The title of my sermon for Sunday is Stone Catchers. Jesus is a stone catcher here. The crowd wanted to throw the stones. And this story makes me think about, and this is what I'm preaching about on Sunday morning, who are we as the church and who are we as the followers of Jesus? Are we stone throwers or stone catchers? Are we willing to stand up and do the right thing for vulnerable people, people who are at risk, whether it's the racial inequities that we face, people in our society who are vulnerable, people in our communities, people that we know, our family, and rather than throwing stones at them, are we willing to stand up for them, in front of them, and catch the stones that are thrown? That whole phrase, that image, is quite compelling to me, and that's what Jesus does here. He's a stone catcher, and I think that's what the church is called to do, to be stone catchers, not stone throwers. Because we're not condemned. We're set free to live, to love, and as Jesus says in verse 12, the very next story in John 8, he says, "I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life." Being a stone catcher means you are the light of the world. And that's what we're called to be and to do as the church. Spend some time with this word. Read it a couple times. Just meditate on it and consider how you can be one of those people that is willing to be a stone catcher because of your faith in Christ. Thanks for tuning in. Bye-bye.